Hi, this is a video to show you how to name both ions as well as naming ionic compounds. And so let's jump right into things here. So just as a reminder, if you look, you're going to need your periodic table out for this video. And if we look at the periodic table, I'm just going to draw a little quick picture of the periodic table. Just as a reminder, everything to the left over here is going to be a metal, and everything to the right of the stair-step line is a non-metal. And we need to keep that in mind when we're naming ions. And so, for example, let's say we take calcium. Now, calcium is an ion. It's right about right there. It's in 2+, and you should have those charges written on your periodic table already. Now, calcium forms a 2+ ion. Now, it means it's going to lose 2 electrons. Now, when we go to name it, it's super easy. We're just still going to call it calcium, and we're just going to add the word ion to it. No big deal. Calcium ion. But if you're naming something like, let's say, nitrogen. Nitrogen is a nonmetal. Nitrogen is right here in group 5A, and it forms a 3- charge. And so we're going to put a 3- charge on here. When you name an ion that is a nonmetal, what we're going to do is we have to drop the end of the word, and then we're going to add an IDE suffix. So nitrogen becomes nitride with that IDE suffix. And typically I tell students the best way to go about this is just to kind of say it out loud, and if it kind of sounds right, if it rolls off the tongue, it is probably right. Let me give you one more example. Let's say oxygen. Oxygen is right here in group, in group 6A, and everybody in group 6A forms a 2- charge, and so oxygen is a 2-. And so when it forms an ion, what we're going to call it, we're going to drop the ending and we're going to call it oxide. Now, sometimes students they try to write other things like oxyide or oxygenide. Those don't really sound correctly. Oxide is where we're looking for, where that break is. So nitride oxide is what we're looking for, and that's how we name an ion. The next thing I want to really quickly is talk about how we name compounds. But before we talk about that, we need to define a couple things. Let's define what an ionic compound is. And in general, an ionic compound is going to be 2 or more elements. They're always going to be made up of a metal or metals plus nonmetals. Metals plus nonmetals. So 2 or more elements bonded together made up of metals and nonmetals. That's going to be in essence what an ionic compound is. And what they're held together is they're held together by what's called an ionic bond. And what an ionic bond is a force of attraction due to opposite charges. So in our previous examples with those ions, we talked about how calcium forms an ion, and we call it the calcium ion, and we talked about how nitrogen will form an ion and be called the nitride ion. These two are going to be attracted to each other because of opposite charges, because one charge is positive and one charge is negative. And we're going to actually have more come in here, and that is going to be our ionic bond that is formed that holds these two together due to opposite charges, much like the way magnets are held together. That magnets are held together. If you've ever played with a magnet, you know a magnet is held together. It has positive and negative ends, and it'll be attracted to an opposite charge. Okay, those are held together. It's very, very similar. Okay, so when we go to name simple ionic compounds, and these are going to be compounds found in group 1A, 2A, 3A, 5A, 6A, 7A. It's going to be really easy to name because we already know what we should do. And so let me talk about this. First off, let's say we're naming somebody like this. Let's go KCl. The K is going to be our metal, that's potassium, and the Cl is going to be our nonmetal. And so when we go to name this, our metal, again, remember these are being held together by opposite charges, they're ions. We're just going to call that potassium. And our nonmetal, remember, also going to have a charge. It's going to be held together by opposite charges. We're going to add that IDE ending. We're going to call this compound potassium chloride with that IDE ending. So that's the name of this ionic compound. Something you might run across some compounds that have subscripts like this. Let's say you have F2. All this subscript means, and what I'm talking about with a subscript is this number down here, all this really means is you have 2 fluorine atoms in this compound and you just have 1 calcium atom in this compound. And we're not going to worry about those numbers yet. That'll be a different lesson and how we get those numbers and why those numbers are there. But for now, we're not going to worry about those with respect to naming. We're still going to call this is our metal. This is going to be calcium, and this is our nonmetal. We're going to call this fluoride, calcium fluoride with that IDE ending. Fluorine becomes fluoride, and that's how we name ionic compounds. And so this goes along with what we did in class today, and that would be naming ions as well as naming simple ionic compounds, which were group A elements.